with anything, it takes time to get to where you're trying to go. It takes time. If you've been depressed for a year, it'd be difficult to set the expectation for yourself to feel better in a few sessions,
Mhm.
because what you feel now is probably how you feel majority of the time. So it's going to take, some effort, some time, some understanding, some patience, hopefully to be able to, feel whatever you feel like you need to feel.
Hello, welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I am the founder and president here at Heart and Solutions in Iowa. We are a mental health counseling agency. We're still doing in-office mental health therapy for all ages in any of our 6 office locations in Iowa, or we are also offering telehealth to anybody that lives in Iowa. So give us a call if you are looking to start counseling services here in our state.
And I'm Krista Hunt. I am the Vice President at Heart and Solutions in charge of our BHIS department. So BHIS stands for Behavioral Health Intervention Services, and that is the program where we will go in-home and work with children ages 4 through 18 on different behavioral skills. We can also do that telehealth and virtually across the state as well. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So we post on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Central, new episodes every single week. We encourage you to batch up your laundry or batch up whatever horrible task you hate doing. Save it to only think about that and do that one time a week. Krissa and I will be putting away our clean clothes and our clean laundry so that we have outfits for that entire week. That also gives you that entire week to get scheduled with your counselor if you haven't seen them in a while, to reach out to our guests from the show or the resources available on that week's show and get connected. So Sunday nights, 5 p.m. Central, always a new episode. All right. So today we have a guest who is a mental health counselor. And so he's going to be able to give us this inside perspective on what it's like to be in counseling, what you can expect when you go to see a therapist, and especially a virtual therapist. I think virtual therapy being so new, really 2020 was the first time this became available to the mainstream. Before that, you had to pay for that yourself out of your own pocket and write a check every week yourself. Insurance wasn't covering that. But since 2020, insurances have started covering that, and that has been such a shift. And virtual counseling is new for so many people, and it's new for therapists as well. So I'm interested to talk more about that. So we've got Anthony Quarles here from Virginia with us today. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you for being here. So now you are licensed not only in Virginia, but you're licensed in Massachusetts, Ohio, and Arkansas.
Yes,
so,
yes.
so anybody that's listening to this episode, you can sign up for virtual therapy sessions with Anthony if you live in Virginia, Massachusetts, Ohio, or Arkansas. So that's quite a wide variety of states that you're able to offer services to. Do you find a difference as you are doing these virtual sessions between states? Are there different requirements that you have to be aware of when you're meeting with somebody from Massachusetts versus somebody from Arkansas?
Not that I'm too much aware of. I kind of look at the regulations and things. As long as I keep my license active in those places, I'm able to provide, therapy services to anybody in the whole state, which I think that's an amazing thing now with telehealth. Just having that accessibility, and people now, especially that live in more rural areas, having opportunities, to engage in therapy when it may have not been an option, like you said, before like 2020, before 2020 or so.
Yeah. Did you used to provide in-person therapy, or have you only always done virtual?
So I've done in person off and on before COVID and things like that. So previously it was in person. And then when I lived in Arkansas, I did a hybrid model when we were there.
So what are some of the benefits that your clients are finding by being able to do those sessions virtually as opposed to coming into an office and sitting down in a room with a therapist?
Yes, I think it's a lot more convenient for some of the clients I have, them not having to necessarily request off uh, for the ones who work, during the day or have to use PTO or have to call in or different things where they're able to, some of them are able to utilize their lunch breaks or break times or, various times throughout the day. And like when we lived in Boston, it was people enjoyed it a lot more because of like traffic and parking and things like that. A lot of people commute in larger cities, so they really loved it because they didn't have to commute or find parking or pay for anything. They could just do it in the convenience of their home or wherever they may be that that was appropriate. So I've seen that be a major benefit, just having that access. And for a lot of people, they feel comfortable also, the first timers, having kind of that space in between and not being in person.
Mm.
So a lot of people I've seen are nervous about starting therapy, and I think some are less nervous because of it being virtual. And they feel like there's even though you can still get the same results and be connected, but they feel like it's like that physical distance where, if something goes wrong, you can kind of just log off, or, you can do a lot of different things or take a moment or turn your camera off and get yourself together, where in person, it's real time. There's not
You can't
much you
like
can do
walk out of the
besides.
room.
Exactly. So I think that is helpful for a lot of people. So those are a couple of the benefits I've seen.
Yeah. What are the difference between like in-person and telehealth sessions? Are there different types of interventions that you use?
Kind of. It's for me, it's pretty much the same. I know it was a lot different when I worked with more children and adolescents.
Mhm.
I can do a lot more hands-on things, a lot more activities, of course, games and reading materials. I think it's for children, it's a lot easier to engage, of course, compared to virtual. For the adults I see, or the older teenagers, for me, it's probably about the same type of work I did in person. But I know the biggest difference for me was typically for the younger children. It's a lot harder to keep them engaged virtually, and they're probably more distracted with all the things in their home and their siblings or their game system or whatever it may be that may be a higher priority at that time. So when you're in the office, there's really nowhere to go, and we have activities and
Mhm.
games and things, so they would do all right for their session time.
Yeah. What kinds of activities do you do for children when you're doing the telehealth services for them? What kinds of things are you able to do without
Yeah.
being in the same room?
So currently I don't work with children anymore, but when I did early on when COVID started, it would be found different resources on different websites I received from, some supervisors or colleagues, videos. There were random online game sites and different things that started to be more popular as, people realized that virtual therapy and virtual schooling was probably here to stay at that point, at least. So just utilizing those more online resources, things that you can share your screen and the child could engage more in and keep their attention, with some of the things that I used to utilize when I did work with children.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember when COVID first happened too, we had to go straight to telehealth strictly, and half of our clients are children. So trying to
Yeah,
find like resources and activities and websites that are like, we found like giving tours of museums and things like that virtually, but it
yeah.
definitely was tricky. What types of populations do you focus on now then? What types of people do you have as clients?
Yeah, primarily I see young adults, I guess I would say. The population I have typically is college age to maybe 40s. That's probably the bulk of the people that I support right now. More mild to moderate things you will see, of the anxiety, depression, of course. A lot of people with relationship struggles, relocation, just things of that nature. More, mild to moderate issues I see typically in that age range.
there's so many adjustments that happen in that age range. I think more than maybe other age ranges, we are finding ourselves. We're figuring out who we are and what we like and what we don't like. And in that age range, we're finding that autonomy from our families and being able to disconnect in some ways from who our families are to who we are. And there's a lot of, and then we're in that age range, we're starting new families and we're becoming part of those systems. And so there are so many changes that happen and adjustments that we go through during that time period. And it is a time where things like adjustments, things like, okay, well, I just graduated from college. Now, what am I supposed to do with my day? Right. Or things like, oh man, I going to what country do I want to live in? Right. Just even
Yeah.
things like that that come up. Those aren't typically associated for everybody with mental health counseling, but those are some of those pieces that it's so important that we have our mental health with us to support us in those decisions and in those challenges of those normal challenges of life that we think of as, well, everybody turns 21, right? Everybody does these are normal things in our society, and they're things that are encouraged in our society. And yet every one of us experiences them in a completely different way than the person next to us. And so being able to have our mental health being as strong and as sharp as it can be, even when things are going well, and even when
Yeah.
things are progressing, is so important. Um, what are some of the barriers for people in that age range, those young adults? What are some of the barriers that they find with attending therapy or being able to engage in therapy?
Yeah. So for some of my college aged or younger clients I have, it's not having feeling like they don't have a lot of support when it comes to therapy and counseling, because a lot of them say their parents didn't go, or some of their friends don't go yet because they're not a little older and experienced a lot more life. Different things like that, where they're younger, they feel like they've been taught to kind of push through and figure things out. And are you trying hard enough? Are you really depressed? Are you really anxious? Are you making excuses? Different things like this. Sometimes maybe they hear from peers or parents or social media, where they feel like if they go to therapy, they may appear to be not able to handle life after like college, or life even if they didn't go to college, whatever their situation is as an adult. So it's kind of like how people will view them if they find out they're in therapy, or they find out they're struggling. So I feel like that for the younger people I have, that's sometimes a barrier, because they see their peers and they appear to be fine, and they're like, why are they okay? We have similar lives, so like, why am I struggling with things? So some of that, and then just with other clients I have, some of the barriers are just overall understanding how to even find a therapist, and how this works, and what this looks like, and how much it costs, and all these different questions. How long does it take is probably one of the main things, of like, how long before I feel better?
Mhm.
Or it's like the skepticism of like, how can you help me virtually talk about things to the point where I maybe feel a little bit better? So sometimes those are the barriers, just kind of that psychoeducation and understanding what therapy is, counseling is, what this looks like, and how, it probably differs depending on who you see, where you are located, all those different things as well.
Mhm. So when somebody does call in or does want to start services, like what can they expect? Like what does a first session look like with you?
Yeah, for me, I like to start off with, hopefully they've already submitted the paperwork and I have some background, but I always talk about first time versus the ones who have had therapy or multiple therapists. Always for the first time people, I go through a lot of the basics and what it looks like, generally, but really specifically for me, because what I do know is people have sometimes talked to others about therapy, and watch TV and watch movies, and they have some idea or some type of vision of what their experience may look like, and I try to help them understand what it looks like with me at least, and how that may be different from the next therapist or the in-person therapist. And then the people that have been to therapy before or multiple times, I always like to understand how, what their experiences were like. I do the basic questions of what you like, what didn't you like, because what didn't work, what worked, and if it's something different they're coming for now versus what they went for in the past. So that helps me kind of have some direction. It helps me understand what they're looking for, and then if I need to have that tough conversation of maybe I'm not any different from the past people that you went to, and that's a conversation we can have at some point if you feel like we need to, if it's not working for you again. So
Mhm.
I like to get some of the basics out of the way, but I do feel like I spend a different amount of time just going over the basics with the people who have never been, because I want them to have an understanding early. So later, it won't be like, oh, I've seen you 4 times and I still feel the exact same. Or I didn't know it cost this much. Or I didn't know I had to pay for this. Or, this doesn't look like my friend who goes to in-person therapy in a different city or something. So I just try to provide the education. So hopefully that, limits any maybe confusion or miscommunication later on.
Yeah, so for the people who want to know, like, how fast is it going to work or how long is it taking
Yeah.
before I feel better? Like, what are some of the things you say to them?
One thing I like to, of course, ask is how long have they felt whatever? And some people it's recently, some people it's forever. And, with anything, I always let them know it's a process, it's a journey. I compare it to trying to get to anything, especially the college, students I've had, I'm like, it took you a few years to do what you wanted to do. So, with anything, it takes time to get to where you're trying to go. It takes time. If you've been depressed for a year, you it's it'd be difficult to set the expectation for yourself to feel better in a few sessions,
Mhm.
because what you feel now is probably how you feel majority of the time. So it's going to take, some effort, some time, some understanding, some patience, hopefully to be able to, feel whatever you feel like you need to feel. So just trying to help them understand that and perspective. I compare it to like working out or anything, right? You want to lose weight, gain weight. We all wish it could just happen tomorrow, but unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that.
Mhm.
So the hard part is working through the things and trying to stay committed and dedicated and intentional. And then a lot of times I feel like people get those outcomes they desire.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you're having those conversations too with clients because it's so important to define and express what it means to feel better, and what progress means because I might feel better after 3 or 4 sessions in terms of I feel like, well, the thing I came in for, the challenge that I came in for, that's not resolved, but maybe I have some hope now, or maybe I feel like, well, I've got some traction now. I've done the heavy lifting of getting in to the session, and I've got these sessions in my calendar now, right? So feeling like we've got some traction, and that is better. It's just not better if we think about better in terms of, well, now all my problems have gone away and I feel like
Yeah.
I'm on a pink cloud dancing with unicorn donkeys every single day. Right.
Right.
And so I love that you're having those, setting those expectations ahead of time, and collaborating with your clients of they get to set a lot of those outcomes. They get to set, what does it mean? What are we aiming for? And depending on what we're aiming for, that's how much time it's going to take. And we're going to go down some wrong, we're going to take some wrong turns, and those are going to take time. But because we've made that wrong turn and identified that as a wrong turn, now we won't take that wrong turn again. And so even
Yep.
though it took time, we it's moving us forward in our journey towards that path that is going to work for us. I'd love to hear too about, you mentioned the paperwork, and this can be such a barrier for people. And in person, it wasn't always as much of a barrier because I think sometimes people would go through kind of that traditional sense before the internet. People would call in to a phone number. Somebody would answer. They would say, "When can you schedule?" They would get scheduled. They would take all their information over the phone. And then they would come in and they would sign all their paperwork with their therapist, or with the administrator when they came into the office. Things are different with telehealth. And I think sometimes even that process of making that phone call was very challenging for
Yeah.
people who don't like making, I don't like making phone calls. If I can email something,
Yes.
my voicemail says, please don't leave me a voicemail. Please email me or please text me. So, phone call versus online paperwork, they all have their own individual challenges. But I think when people kind of picture that intake process, they kind of picture that previous model. So what does this new model look like with telehealth therapy?
Yeah, I am totally with you. I am pro technology, anti phone calls. I try to push for more text message, emails, use the portal because I feel like that is more efficient for me, to have the time to answer a call or get on a call. It's not a whole lot of time in your day where unless you set a time aside time, and then of course you call back and they're like, "I'm working, I can't talk to you. I'll talk to you randomly when you have a session or something." It
Mhm.
just doesn't work out a lot of times. So for me, I I I use therapy notes, which I think for me works the best and the most experience I've had since I've done telehealth. I like the ability personally to be able to not have to call anybody. I wish a lot of therapists just had a link where you can just see what times they have, if they take my insurance or whatever maybe, and I can just pick it based off of my calendar, so I don't have to keep calling or keep texting or keep trying to figure it out or rescheduling things like that. So eventually I got to the point where I set up my schedule like that, where I really encourage people to self-schedule, because that way you can, you can make it make sense for your life and your time. Um, so with that, they schedule and then I'm able to send them all the paperwork, and it's pretty straightforward. Of course, I always say, reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns or anything comes up or you're not able to access it for any reason, or if you need me to reset your portal, things like that. But so far, it's been very effective. Haven't had anybody really say it didn't work for them or they didn't understand it or it felt different from what they did in the past or anything like that. So for me, I feel like it's worked out because they also have the time, and not in a rush or anything to try to hurry up and get it done in the waiting area or throughout the session, or they don't feel pressure. They have some time with themselves to think about it and figure it out and fill it out, whenever works best for them. And they can see it beforehand and know that it's probably going to be discussed when they meet me for
Mhm.
the first time. So I really like, kind of the virtual paperwork and things like that. Plus, I don't have to have all these papers everywhere and binders and
Yeah.
storage things, and I don't have to worry about misplacing anything. I know where to find it, and I guess it's there forever too. So I can always download it if I need to take it, or if I use a different platform or something as well. So I think for me, it's been more efficient. I think it's helped with my time management and things as well. And I think it helps also with my notes or intake, documents where I can copy and paste a lot of things, and before you just read off, you have to rewrite or you have to type what's on the paper. And, so for me, it saves a little time on that, which I know that's a huge topic for, people that write notes is how can we save time? How can we be more efficient? How can we hopefully do less, sometimes. So I think for me, it's been a good experience.
What led you into the counseling field? What made you want to be a counselor?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I liked psychology, but that wasn't my major at the time. I had this like idea of being like an attorney or something. I don't know where that came from. It was an idea, and I quickly figured out that I was not interested in that at all after taking all these uh, political science and legal study classes in government. And I was like, I honestly do not care. And I stumbled into psychology as my minor, and it was like the most interesting thing at that time in undergrad. And then I took like this criminal psychology and like we had this cool class about like serial killers or something. And I was like, I didn't realize there was so much to like how people behaved and the thinking patterns and all this. So at that point, I was sold on it. I'm like, how can I find a career? What do I do with this minor in psychology? And I quickly turned out not much. There's not much you can do right after undergrad. And I got a job in my hometown at a mental health hospital, thanks to my mom, who worked at the main hospital now for like 20 something years. So she got me my first job in mental health. I always give her credit for that because I had no clue what the plan was. And then I worked with children and adolescents in an inpatient facility. It was more acute, so the kids are there for like a week or two max, sometimes a little longer depending. And then I realized, I was kind of like a glorified babysitter. I was a mental health tech, so I did all the hard work, I felt like, de-escalating the groups, story time, it felt like movie snacks. Did that for a little while. Then I realized they had social workers and therapists. And I'm like, well, what do you all do? Like, I really didn't know at that point. And they're like, oh, we have family sessions, individual sessions. I'm like, oh, sounds a lot better than what I'm doing. So this one lady I remember, she always asked me, like, is this something you're interested in? The kids love you. You seem to do this pretty well. Like the groups you're doing is therapy. You're just not a social worker or a therapist. So I think so the longer I worked there, the more I was interested. And then, as time went on, kids used to think I was the therapist or they would hope I was the therapist sometimes. And then I got this idea that I'm like, maybe I can be a therapist. Maybe I should be a therapist because there also wasn't a lot of young therapists, and there definitely wasn't any like therapists of color. I'm from Indiana, a smaller place. So there wasn't a lot of options for people of color either. So I was like, okay, maybe this is a good, thing to take or try to do. And then from there, I just went to school and then kind of the rest is history. But it started really with me working in the inpatient facility that gave me that idea that there needs to be more therapists, and maybe I can, be one of those people that, help children at that time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that you're serving so many different states because there are, as you identified, young therapists that can connect with younger people. Now, not that you can't connect with a young person if you're older,
Yeah.
but there is something to that, something to the identification. And being a therapist of color is huge. There's such a need and there's such a lack. And so being able to say, if you're in any of these 4 states, you can
Yeah.
meet with me. The other thing is that being a male therapist, there are so few male therapists. And it is such a predominantly female field that for young men who are seeking that male therapist, it's very difficult for them to find somebody. So I love that you're out there doing this and not only in the location that you're in, but spreading that out to all these different states because the need is so there. And it's beautiful that you're able to do that and see that need and then say, I'm the person. I see a need. These kids want to work with me. These kids want to do therapy with me. I'm going to make that happen. I'm going to fill that need. I'm the person. And I think that's beautiful. I can very much relate with what you're saying about wanting to be an attorney. My uh, bachelor's degree is in criminal justice, and my undergrad was in sociology and psychology. And I went, oh my gosh, what is this? This is amazing. What do I do with this? What is this? And so I think there is such a draw. to these two fields. We see that a lot where our guests have started out in criminal justice or started out in law enforcement, and then kind of taken this different approach to how we're helping people, because in both scenarios we're helping people. And I think that when we go into a field like criminal justice, where we go, yeah, I want to help people as an attorney, right? I want to help people by working in juvenile justice, and then being able to kind of see this line. There's when I was doing my undergrad, I was like, there seems to be this line in the system.
Yeah.
There's punishment and there's rehabilitation, and seeing that line and going, oh man, what side of that line do I want to be on? Because they're both necessary. But for me, the rehabilitation and the prevention side was really what drew me to counseling over being an attorney. And it seems like for you, that was that same desire to want to help people.
Yeah.
And in your bio, I mean, you describe therapy as the partnership of therapy, and you describe therapy as an investment in yourself. So tell me about that. How is therapy an investment in ourselves?
For me, it's like often overlooked that when people think about their health, of course, they a lot of times think about medical, physical, and then a lot of people talk about their financial health and how can they get their finances where they need to be or where they want them to be. And then I feel like sometimes mental health and behavior health, things like that, is kind of like, not the highest priority for some people. It's I'm glad to see it's becoming more of a priority for a lot of people. I think with more accessibility and more platforms and more like influencers and social media, I think it's becoming way more popular, of course. But I think it's often overlooked when people aren't well. They a lot of times go to a doctor, or they'll figure out their money or have a financial person, and then maybe later they'll come see us when all else fails, maybe potentially. But I think for me, I try to tell people that a lot of things we want for ourselves or to better ourselves, they one, it may cost, but two, it also takes, some dedication and some engagement and some effort. So with you going to therapy with anybody, you're investing in hopefully your overall well-being. The better, you feel mentally, it affects your work life and your relationships and probably your financials and other parts of your life where you see the benefit. And it's not just off. I feel less depressed, but hopefully if you feel less depressed, you're able to perform better in all different parts of your life. So I always look at it as an investment, but I also look at it as a partnership, because it's, yes, you have to do most of the work, and it's a lot of it is on you to figure things out outside of therapy, of course, but I'm along for the ride with you. I'm there to support you, in whatever capacity. I tell people that my support looks different depending on who I'm trying to work with. Some people don't really need me to say a whole lot. They just want to talk about something. Some people really ask you for guidance or interventions or strategies or resources, where it's a little bit more work, of course. But some people, they're just like, they need a sounding board. They need some feedback. They need somebody that's a neutral party and not their friends or family. So just trying to describe those different supports and what that looks like for different people also helps a lot of my, newer clients or clients who haven't been to therapy, and not realize like, oh, I just talk to this guy and then I just go off and figure things out all the time by myself, because everybody doesn't have other supports either. But some people, I'm like their accountability partner. I'm like, okay, we had a little homework, you didn't get to it, or we weren't able to do it. Let's just talk about it. I'm not here to make you feel worse. I'm not here to judge you, but a lot of times with our support system, they are helpful, but at the same time, we can feel a little judged, or we can feel burdensome, or different things where that's not my place to do that. It's my place to help you figure out what those barriers were, what, distortions, what happened throughout your week or 2 weeks before, since I've seen you. So I always try to use like we and, things like that, because people like to feel connected. People like to, of course, not feel alone. And you see so many people who feel like they don't have anybody, or they don't have any connectivity. And it's just like, you need to do things. You need to do things. And I don't want people to feel like that, at all, but especially when they talk to me about what's going on in their life. So, like you said, for me, I try to, really focus in on the partnership part of it, and the investment part of it. Like I said, I always compare things. It's easy for me to compare things to working out, where you pay for a personal trainer. They're not cheap, of course, but the goal is to have that level of support, because you may be able to get where you're trying to go, probably maybe a little bit easier, or differently, with that support, compared to just going to the gym trying to figure it out by yourself all the time. I always tell people there's all these supports in place, but we just have to work on figuring out how to utilize them and what works for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that you said you had a great counseling experience. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it didn't start great. My very first experience was not great at all in grad school, and that I always tell people that was probably one of the biggest motivators for me as like a first semester student. I was just going through a lot. I went through a counselor for the first time in my life, and he was just like, "You'll be all right. You're young. You're just going through a little heartbreak and you're overwhelmed with school." And I'm like, "Sir, I am not well." And he's just, "You'll be all right." I never went back, and I never went to therapy again really until 2020. So it took me like 4 years, even though I was a therapist during that time, to realize like I need to, work on myself some more, of course. And then I went and I met this lady. She works in Massachusetts, and it was the best first experience I could have asked for, because she was a very positive woman. And I can, in my personal life, I can be not so positive, and she would always make me start off with positive talk and ask me what's all going well in my life, because she knew once I get started on what's not going well, like I could talk for days. So she was like, she figured that out quickly. Like, I need him to, remind himself of all the great things he has going for himself and all the positive things in his life. And she taught me about neutral, and I didn't really ever look at things like that. She's like, some things aren't necessarily good or bad. Some things are just in the middle. And I was like, oh yeah. She's like, everybody puts things left or right, but sometimes things are just okay. And if you put some of those things in that category, you might not feel like everything's always so bad. And I was like, yeah, you might actually know how to be a therapist. This feels like a good experience. So that was my first experience. And then we moved, and then I had a couple other great therapists as well. But that experience with her really helped me, one, realize I needed to talk through some of my things and have a safe space for me, but also, be able to have experiences that, support the clients I have, as in, I don't have a problem disclosing some of my personal things with people. That's been helpful for me, and that's always helpful for the therapist I see, because like I said earlier, I feel like people don't want to feel alone, or people are like, I'm a therapist, I'm seeing a therapist, and they're like, I see a therapist too. This is just how this works. And I'm like, okay, this is cool, because I haven't been a therapist forever. So it's just been helpful to have that space to work through something. My mom always wanted me to have a therapist since I became a therapist. And I was like, oh, I'll be fine. And I quickly learned about being burnt out. And I don't have kids. So working with kids early on was so tough, working with foster care and juvenile probation and community work. And they're like, Mr. Anthony, why don't you take me with you? And I'm like, I'm not well. I'm in the car all sad and stuff. The early days, I didn't know how to work through that stuff. But I just would be like a lot of young people. Oh, I'll be fine. I'll just push through. And I just pushed through to the point of being burnt out and feeling overwhelmed all the time. So as I've gotten older, I've really, practiced, more self-care, and the better I am, for, my life, my wife, and the people I work with and things like that.
Absolutely. I love what you shared about neutrality. That is beautiful. That we moralize every situation. We say, well, this is the best ever, or this is the worst ever. And if something doesn't feel great and exciting and exuberant, then we lump it in sometimes with bad. Well, then it's bad. Well, then it's not good. And that neutrality, that feeling of neutrality is where so much peace comes from, is in the neutral. Because excitement and joy, even, those aren't peaceful feelings.
Yeah.
Those are very disruptive feelings. Even though they might be enjoyable feelings, they're disruptive. They're not peaceful feelings. And where those peaceful feelings come from is accepting the neutrality of it, and accepting neutrality of being neutrality isn't zero. It's a place.
Yeah.
And it's a place in a category where a lot of things fit. And the more fits into that category and place, the more peace that we have in our lives. So that I love that. That is beautiful. And I love what you shared too about therapy being an investment in ourselves. I think about generationally, my daughter's grandparents never went to the dentist growing up, and now if you have a child, your school makes them go to
Yeah.
the dentist, and you have to go get your eyes checked and you have to get well child visits, but even in our parents' time, that when they were growing up, that wasn't a thing. You didn't go to the dentist unless you had a really bad toothache. And then we started seeing all the research and the data about how much tooth health, tooth hygiene affects our heart and our cardiovascular system
Yeah.
and our nervous system and our brain health. And that's where we started to go, oh, this is important. This is an investment. And it's that, we pay for it now or we pay for it later. There's a cost to
Yeah.
going to therapy. I love that you acknowledge that, yeah, there's a financial cost, but sometimes more than that, there's a time cost, there's an emotional cost, to going to counseling and working on these things. It's tiring, it's exhausting sometimes, doing therapy sessions and working on these things for ourselves, but if we don't, then we pay for it later down the road, and sometimes we pay a lot more down the road. So I love that metaphor as well. So, if you could give one suggestion to somebody who might be on the fence about starting counseling, what suggestion might you give to them?
For me, it's the suggestion I would give is to look at it from both sides. What will your life look like if you potentially don't try versus what potentially could happen if you do try? I know a lot of times it's hard to start a lot of things, but it's like weighing the commitment, the dedication versus hopefully that long term or that feeling or emotion or whatever you want to resolve and work through. I always ask people what has worked for them before and the reasons for feeling like they need more support. A lot of times I ask, why what did you try before and what led you to therapy? Because sometimes it's maybe nothing and sometimes it is maybe a bunch of therapists. So I always tell people that a lot of things, that hopefully can benefit you are, worth a try. And then you can always say, well, at least I tried something, before you make whatever decision to maybe live how you're living now or, try a different, approach to, resolving some things. So I just always encourage people to, a lot of things are worth one try. And then for some people that was a life-changing experience and it opened the idea of I can be and feel however I want to, or it's not impossible. So that's kind of how I try to approach, the people that are on the fence or the people who are, used to sit in the parking lot and really just not feel like, they can make a decision, or the people who maybe call and never answer again, or the people who send an email and then I reply and they don't reply because they're just on the fence. So I follow up on a lot of people too, because that's just kind of how I am. I'm a little worrier, but I just always want to know that it's not like you sent the email, I replied, and then you're on the fence. And then sometimes if you send another email, they're like, okay, I can do this because clearly somebody may kind of care about me coming to therapy, and I think that is huge for me to make people feel like there are people in this world that still care about people. So I think that's kind of how I look at that.
I love that.
But thank you all for having me. I'm Anthony Quarles, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. So do I. So does Krissa. We all do. I love to see a therapist actively engaging in therapy and sharing that with the world, because we all need to be. It's so good for us, and I'm so glad that you're out there setting this example for your clients and also for other therapists. So if you would like to get connected with Anthony, you can go to his website at aquarlescounseling.com. All of this will be in the show notes, but aquarlescounseling.com. You can find him on Psychology Today. We don't talk about Psychology Today nearly enough, but if you go to www.psychologytoday.com, and if you type in Virginia Beach and Anthony, I guarantee you will find him. And psychologytoday.com is such a great resource for anybody looking for a counselor of any kind. You can sort by your insurance type. You can search by the religion of the counselor you would like. You can search by ethnicity. You can search by age. You can search by background, demographic, education, techniques. There's so many ways to sort through a giant list of counselors and find one that you really connect with and you feel like you want to meet with. So you can find Anthony on Psychology Today. You can also find him on Instagram at thatdude_AQ and on TikTok at thatdude_AQ. So go on social media and look up that dude, because it's just really awesome to see TikTok and Instagram being used to promote mental health and to promote counseling services and allowing people to have access to those services. If you are here in Iowa, go ahead and give us a call at 800-531-4236. If you are a mental health therapist and you're looking for play therapy CEUs to be delivered to you, we have live webinars every single month, and you also would be available to utilize any of our recorded trainings. So you can find those packages on patreon.com at patreon.com/heart and solutions. Also, we invite you to, if you're watching this on YouTube, we invite you to like this video, share, subscribe to the channel so that you can get these new episodes every single week. And also so that you can get connected with the resources that you find here on the show. If you've listened to this show and you think, gosh, Anthony seems like somebody that I could meet with weekly, that I feel like I could connect with. He feels like a safe person to talk to. If you are subscribed, you're going to get these videos. You're going to get that information every time and be able to connect with our guests from that week. So Anthony, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been really, really great. And we hope that people reach out to you to get started.
Thank you all.
And like Julie mentioned at the beginning, we do post new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central. So you can find us on YouTube or Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we can help connect you with our guests and get started with services that week as well. If you have any questions for us as well, we also now have a phone number where you can text or leave a voicemail and we can answer those questions anonymously. So you can reach us at 515-650-3231, or you can also ask us questions on our Facebook page at You Need a Counselor Podcast or our Instagram at You Need a Counselor Podcast. So I'm Krissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.